This meeting is now called to order. I'd like to welcome everyone this evening. For roll call, everyone is in attendance. We will now take a moment of reflection and respect, please. Thank you. Could you please read the resolution, Josh?
That council adopts the agenda for the meeting of September 20th, 2021 as presented.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Charlton and Councillor Oslach, are there any questions or concerns? Seeing none, that's carried. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Okay, seeing none. We do have public meetings this evening. On the first meeting is Daryl Abbs from Watson and Associates. He's here to discuss the water and wastewater rate study. Could you please read the resolution, Josh?
That council do now commence a public meeting at 7:01 p.m. to receive input from the public with respect to the item 5.1.1, Watson and Associates Economists, Water and Wastewater Rate Study, Town of Aylmer.
Thank you, Josh. Someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Barber and Deputy Mayor Andrews, are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. This evening, we will be hearing a delegation from Watson and Associates Economist respecting Town of Aylmer water and wastewater rates. Council retained Watson and Associate Economists to carry out a review of current water and wastewater rates and to recommend new rates to ensure that both the water and wastewater systems are financially sustainable and will continue to be in compliance with all provincial regulations regarding operations, maintenance, and infrastructure replacement. Watson and Associates has completed its report. Council is hosting a public meeting to enable representatives of Watson and Associates to present the results of its review and to enable the public to ask questions about the review and the recommended rates. I would now like to welcome Watson and Associates to the public meeting this evening, and we will now hear your presentation. Thank you, and go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If it's okay, I'd like to actually pass along the presentation to my colleague, Gary Scanlon, partner with Watson and Associates Economists. And
okay, thank you. Welcome, Gary.
Good evening. Pleasure to be before you. So I'm not quite sure if this is the presentation format or I'm kind of seeing split screens. Maybe I guess it's okay, but there we go. Might be a little easier. So if we go to the second page, it's just to, there we go. Much better. Thank you. So just a quick overview of our areas of discussion. Obviously, you've introduced the study purpose. I'd like to proceed just to give a quick background on the legislation. If you recall Walkerton, which is now 20 years ago, a crisis that happened in Ontario, considerable legislative changes have occurred. And as a result, these are the rules that we have to work with today. So we'll overview that. We'll talk about a little bit about the background calculations. You can stay on page 2 if you like. Just go, there we go. So just, we'll go through a little bit of the calculations, which includes looking at a 10-year forecast of capital needs. We've worked with staff to take a look at infrastructure needs. This is something which is ongoing. I'm sure it'll be evolving over time, but there's considerable amount of work that's been identified on the water and the wastewater side. Take a look at the financing, consider operating costs in order to run the system, and then ultimately the corresponding rates which result. If we go to page 3, You can see we've already summarized the study purpose, but just to note, we've looked at this over a 10-year planning horizon. And that's more not that you're going to pre-commit to the rates that we're presenting tonight for that time period, but what we'd like to do is to present to you a trend line on where potentially, with the issues that have been identified, where we would see rates being implemented over time. So it's more of a guidance, and this will assist you when you come back to look at year-to-year rate increases, your capital expenditures, operating expenditures, etc. It's giving you somewhat of a pre-look at where things are potentially going over time. Slide 3, please. Or yeah, next slide. As I've noted, legislative changes considerably since Walkerton. There's the Safe Drinking Water Act, which is the main piece of legislation which guides municipalities and all water providers on how they will run the water system. It talks about the amount of testing, talks about how labs will undertake procedures, requirements for staff to be educated and keep their knowledge levels up to date, etc. So the Safe Drinking Water Act is a major piece of legislation. When the Safe Drinking Water Act was initially introduced in 2002, there was also the next one, which was called the Sustainable Water and Sewage Systems Act. And just the real purpose of that was to identify more of the inventory of the works, take a look at how it's performing, and to develop a long-term plan for the replacement of those assets. Now that legislation was passed, but never truly enacted because not all the regulations were put into place. So ultimately, what we got was the DOT that identifies the Water Opportunities Act, and it's the one that's standing in the shoes right now of that legislation. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of slides. The other two that to keep in mind is this OREG 45307. And what that is a requirement for, until we actually have the ability to develop a financial plan that identifies the inventory and the details, the works that you're going to construct, and then talk about rates, etc. We have this interim piece of legislation. Now that's what you have to file with the province in order to receive your license to run the water system. Right now, you've made all the applications to run your system. This is the one document which still has to be submitted. And with Council's review of what we'll present tonight, we can quickly finalize that document and submit it to the province. So they have all of the legislative requirements in order to approve your water system. The other one I really want to point out is the last bullet on this page, which is the Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act. This piece of legislation requires municipalities to assess all of their assets and to develop a long-term life cycle plan for the upkeep, the renewal, and ultimate replacement of their infrastructure. And that document, in conjunction with the Water Opportunities Act, on a combined basis, replaces that Sustainable Water and Sewage Systems Act. You have a long-term asset management plan, and you have a financial plan for ultimately replacing the assets. So I'll talk a little bit more about the legislation, and then as we go through the presentation, I'll give you some insights into your system relative to those requirements. So if we go to the next slide, please. The Water Opportunities Act, there's three sections of it. It's the last section that we're most focused on. It requires municipality to prepare sustainability plans for water and wastewater. And you can see they've also introduced stormwater services. So over time, this will have to be looked at. If we go to the next slide. So the Act, as you can see in the third bullet down, the Act extends from the financial plans that that were originally envisaged from from SWISA, as we call it, requires you to provide asset management plans and then to provide long-term financial plans for the replacement and managing your water system, as well as your wastewater system and stormwater system. Right now, we'll talk to you tonight more about the water and the wastewater. Stormwater is something that'll be looked at into the future. Now, while this act has been put into place, there's only been one regulation that's been passed, so we haven't got all the regulations in place. They will be coming, but actually they're waiting for that Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act to be put into place before they fully implement this legislation. Next slide. And what they will require, they keep talking about a financial plan, and a financial plan has 5 components. You need the asset management plan, so the detailed infrastructure, so that's from the Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act. You then need to have that plan on how we're going to raise the money, finance the replacement of the assets over a long period of time. For water, they want a conservation plan, so they will introduce some level of targets, and we'll be looking for municipalities to conform within those target ranges. There'll be the 4th bullet talks about an assessment of risk that'll interfere with the future delivery of the service. And the last one talks about strategies for maintaining and improving the municipal service to ensure that demand can be satisfied. So these are the components that we'll ultimately have to deal with once the Water Opportunity Act is in place. But right now, I would anticipate for water and wastewater, this is probably still 2, maybe 3 years out before full implementation of the Act will be put into place. If we go to the next slide, you'll get some insights why I say that. The Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act, as I say, is looking at all asset management for all the assets that you have, not only water, wastewater, storm, but roads, your arenas, all owned assets. The requirement here is to have developed the policy, which would kind of guide you on how you do your approach and calculations. And then they're looking at by the July mid-2022 is to have developed that asset management plan for water and wastewater. So this is something that you're moving towards, and the province would be seeking to see all of these plans developed. And after all of that information is there, then moving towards developing the full-blown financial plans under the Water Opportunities Act. So this plan here is in place. Your staff are evolving towards this, and that'll be something that'll be back before you over the coming years. And as I say, once they complete the water and the wastewater, the province will be looking for you to consider the full requirements of the Water Opportunities Act. Next slide. Excuse me. So I've already touched upon this, and basically the focus here is that the core assets, water, wastewater, storm, and roads are the ones that should be looked at by next year, and then the rest of the assets subsequent to that. Next slide. So just moving to talk about some of the calculations we've done in your behalf. Right now, these are the rates that you have in place. And you have the first part of it is more of a fixed monthly charge. It's called a base charge. And it doesn't matter how much you consume during that period. Depending on the size of your meter, you pay a certain amount. So most houses are paying $9.43 a month for water, $3.34 for wastewater. And as I say, it doesn't matter if you're in Florida on vacation, you consume no water, you'd still be making that contribution. The basis for that is the fact that while that individual may be away for a month or two, While they're away, the municipality is still maintaining the system, so that as soon as you come back, turn on the tap, your water functions is nice and clean, and the system functions well. And similarly, the sewage leaves the house and is dealt with by the municipality. So about 80% of municipalities have this base monthly charge. So it's very common for municipalities to have a fixed monthly charge. On top of it, there's a volume charge. So for water, for most residents, there's $2.24 for every cubic meter that you consume. And for large water users, there's a 20-cent reduction, more to reflect the fact that they're not using as much of the, well, with the high volumes, there's kind of a lesser cost for the related to the capital associated with that. On the wastewater side, it's $1.58. We use the water meter as the way of measuring basically the bill. So whatever the volume is shown on the water meter, we use that as a surrogate in order to impose the charge on the sewage. Next slide. These are your number of customers. You can see you have the same number of water and wastewater customers, and this gives you an indication of by meter size, the number of customers. The 5/8 and 3/4 are basically the single, are more of the residential units. So you can see most of the customers relate to residential. The rest, for the most part, are restaurants or businesses or high volume users across the system. Next slide, please. We've done a forecast, so we've looked at the growth in the system over time. And so we forecast the first, the two blue ones, tables, with the blue headings, they relate to water. So the first one talks about the change in the number of customers over time. And most of the customers are assumed to be residential, probably in that 5/8 category. But as those new customers come on stream, they'll be consuming more water. So the second column, the second table, identifies the additional volumes that we would expect over time as a result of those new customers. When we've done the very similar calculation for wastewater, and that's the basis. When we calculate the expenditures on top, these are the basically the numerator. So we can calculate the base charge and the volumes charge at the end, and we'll show you at the end of the calculations. Next slide, please. Now, with respect to capital infrastructure, as I've noted, we've developed a 10-year plan in conjunction with staff. The next slide, please. You can see the water capital. We've given you, there's a number of projects that have been identified. In total, we're totaling about $17 million of works. So on average, about $1.7 million of expenditures every year. You can see the largest listing there is to deal with existing infrastructure. So there's, in some instances, replacement, upgrades, changes to the system, new SCADA. So a lot of that is put into place. You can see the water tower as well has been identified. There are a few capital works that are there in order to accommodate new growth. So in total, we come up with the $17 million as shown. Similarly, on the next slide, we present the capital program for the wastewater. And you can see there's a significant listing here. And these are all replacement projects. And if we go to the next page, it continues along. And in total, we're looking at about $14 million of wastewater infrastructure that needs to be dealt with over time. Once again, the predominance of these works is basically for replacing the existing system. Next slide, please. Now, financing, there's not a lot of magic to financing the infrastructure. If we can't get external money, so grants, I know the town has applied for a ICIP grant right now. We've been conservative in not including that funding right now. If we do get the funding, it's a minor adjustment to these calculations. But for the most part, it's unclear when and where we'll be getting the grants. We thought with the feds and the province, we'd be looking at something similar to the Build Canada Fund that we saw when we went through the last economic downturn, which was in the 2008 to 2012 period. But there's been no announcements, and so we're a little surprised that we haven't got stimulus funding being announced as of yet. We do have some development charge revenue, so that's an external revenue coming in from as developments proceed, building new homes and new businesses. We're getting capital charges, which will go towards funding some of the growth-related works. And then other than that, it's basically we're generating it off of the rates. We've got money that we're generating from the operating budget, which we're transferring into reserves, and then we're drawing from those reserves to pay for the infrastructure. Or if we haven't got enough money in reserves, we're going out and we're borrowing, we're issuing debt in order to finance that infrastructure. So we provided for a combination of these in order to basically allow for a smooth smooth movement of rates over time. So next slide. And these are the amount of reserves that are and reserve funds that are available. So you can see we've got in total for water about $1.8 million that are available. And for wastewater, we've got about 1.6 million. So that helps us out. That's in the early stages, helps to deal with some of the capital, but we still have to go in and do some debenturing. Next slide. And this gives you the financing that we've developed for this plan. You can see for the water, we've got debenturing requirements, we've got growth and non-growth. So the debt that we're looking at in total is about $8.8 million. And we got about $8.2 million where we're generating the money directly from the rates, putting it into the reserves, and then transferring from the reserves into fund the capital. We do that just to smooth out the rates a little bit more. On the wastewater side, you can see that once again, debentures will fund really about 6 million of the infrastructure, and we got about 8 million, which will be generated ultimately from the rates. Next slide. One of the things I wanted to point out, and this is the work that you'll be doing with the Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act. I know you're in progress. The work hasn't been finalized as of yet, but we do have some high-level information that we've used. If we go to the next slide, give you an indication of some observations. Your infrastructure for water and wastewater will date back as far as the 1950s. That means that some of your infrastructure is about 70 years old. And depending on the types of materials that the water mains or the sewers have been built with, they may have a useful life somewhere between 60 and 100 years. So this is the evaluation you're going through. You're prioritizing how they're performing and what potential useful life you have. For water, you've got about $38 million worth of infrastructure. And keep in mind that there's a lot of infrastructure which is you benefit from, but you don't own. So there's the Elgin primary system, and then there's the secondary systems, which flow the water to your community, and that includes water treatment plants and then those major trunks. So it's not in this costing. This is solely your owned infrastructure. And if we take a look at that 38 million, it means that on a per customer basis, the town's invested about $13,000 per customer. Now, if we look at the water, and it totals about 59 million, it's about $20,000 per customer. So to get the water into the homes and then to take the sewage from the homes and treat it, it's an investment of about $33,000 per customer. That's a sizable amount of infrastructure the municipalities invested. And this is why the province is now pushing municipalities to do these financial plans in order to assess, how much you've got, how long it's going to last, and how you're going to pay for it over time. So this is a key part of our analysis. Next slide. And if we just summarize it here, you can see there's about 38.5 million. On the water side, we're replacing about almost $15 million worth of infrastructure. You can see the wastewater, you've got about $58 million, and we're replacing in the 10-year plan about $9 million of that. Next slide. What the operating budgets, we've looked at basically inflationary impacts for most of the expenditures. For utilities, they've been going up at a little bit higher rate in chemicals, so a slightly higher rate. For the systems, for the secondary system and the primary, we've used the most up-to-date information that's available, and we've incorporated that into the purchased water calculations for the water service. Next slide. We take a look here, just a simple graph to identify. The blue is your operating budget. So this is the day-to-day expenditures for running the system, cleaning the pipes, having staff out dealing with watermen, breaks, etc., and purchasing the water from the Elgin primary and secondary systems. The burgundy is the capital portion of your operating budget. And you can see the expenditures are going up quite considerably over the time. So it has a higher amount. That slope is a little bit higher because we will be increasing more and more of the bills to go towards identifying the infrastructure. Next slide. Similarly, on the wastewater, you can see that the blue is the operating costs. There's a more sizable expenditure level on the wastewater side, which goes to capital. Next slide. So really, this is just a quick summary on the factors. I really touched on them, but it's for the most part, it's capital driven, and it's trying to identify the servicing, the debt, and the transfers on the reserves that will allow for the funding. Now, one thing that we've looked at is with wastewater. You may recall that fixed charge of $3.38 per month, it's pretty small amount. So most of your reliance is on the variable part of the water bill. And if you get a dry year, people consume a lot of water. If you get a wet year, they don't use as much. So the amount of revenue the municipality gets expands and contracts with weather. So the trend with most municipalities is to try and get that fixed monthly amount, that total amount we get, to try and get it up in the range of 20-30% of the bill to create more stability. So we've tried to create, by the end of the 10 years, that fixed bill being representing 20% of your revenue. Next slide. So we're touching on the end here. If we take a look and combine the water and the wastewater bills, basically you can see the combined bill we would expect for the next 3 years running at about 4% per year. It's a little bit higher than inflation, but remember that there's a sizable amount of investment in the capital infrastructure, and that's where the province is taking us. And then for the 25 onwards, it's a little bit higher, averaging about 5% per year. Now, obviously, over time, if there's significant grants that come from the province and the feds, we can revisit this, and that may bring down the rate impacts a little bit. But at this particular point, we're seeing what I would say is a reasonable level of increase over the 10-year planning horizon. And if we go to the last couple of slides, what I'd like to show is where your water and wastewater bills are relative to other comparators. Can you go down a little bit so we can see the names? You can see that your current rates are at the low end of the comparison. So you're a little bit higher than London. And with the adjustments we're identifying, we're saying from 1 year to the next is about $22 a month, $22 a year increase. So that's about $1.80 a month increase on the water side. On the next slide is the wastewater. And once again, you can see that the wastewater, you're in a similar position, being at the lowest end of the comparators within the area. We go and take a look on a combined basis. Obviously, once again, you can see that you're at the lowest level. So we're looking at a marginal increase of 4% between the 2 years. And even as we continue to increase year to year, we still perceive that you'll be in the same position at the lower end. Some municipalities have had to have sizable increases in the last few years, particularly driven by the capital infrastructure needs. So next couple of slides, I'm not going to spend much. That really concludes the observations. The only thing I wanted to point out is from the next couple of slides, just deal with that reporting requirement that we have to do for the province. And I just note that when council considers this, we can prepare that final official document that has to go to the province. And with that, that'll complete your requirements for receiving your permit to your license to run the water system. And I won't go through in detail. It's just more mechanics, but this is what we need to do. That concludes my presentation, Madam Mayor. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Are there any questions for Gary from council members? Councillor Barber, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. To Gary, as far as the financial plan goes and the submission of it, are we ahead of the curve compared to other municipalities of the same size?
In which way in the ahead of the curve?
Well, the plan itself is, are we at least on par in getting the documentation to the province in a timely manner?
Municipalities are actually staged over an 18-month period. So to file the document, you're actually a little bit behind. All the rest of the documents have been filed with the province. The province is waiting for this document to get your final license. So they do, I have to admit, they do give municipalities a little bit of grace. Obviously, with COVID and such, there's a lot of municipalities who have asked for an extension just because, staff levels and dealing with this new environment, it's been a little challenging for everybody to get their documentation. So you're not unusual for most municipalities, but you are a little bit late.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions from council to Gary? Councillor Charlton, go ahead.
Just a comment. I thought it was a great report. Pretty straightforward, easy to understand, and I think if people read this report, they'll appreciate what we have to do to keep our water safe and flowing, and the rate increases help us get that done. So good report. Thank you.
Okay, are there any further comments or questions from council members? Andy, did you have a comment?
Sorry, thank you, Mayor French. I just wanted to tell council that staff really appreciate all the work that Gary and Daryl have done with us. We had a lot of new staff, and we really took this as an opportunity. We are a bit late. We took a lot of time to go through everything kind of with a fine-tooth comb, and just their expertise has been outstanding through the process. And I think we have a much better handle on things than we did 6 months ago. So we really appreciate all their efforts and time spent with us.
Thank you, Andy. Are there any further comments? Councillor Oslech, go ahead. Are you on mute, Councillor Oslech?
Yeah. Your worship, to Watson, how does our lagoon system figure into this?
Maybe I'll have Rob Johnson talk about the plans for for it. I mean, we've embraced some of the improvements, but Rob, do you want to take it? You're on mute. You're on mute.
There, that's better. Thanks, Gary. Certainly, Councillor Oshlag, we've given Watson and Daryl and Gary all the information that we have on the lagoons. Some of them are specific, but as you will recall, we're working right now on sort of an optimization from Aqua. So we have a few of the numbers are placeholders based on some early information from Aqua and the engineer, but I'm confident they're sort of conservative numbers, and some of them have been very specific numbers that they've been able to include in the financial plan.
If you have through you, Madam Mayor, if the councillor has an opportunity, I think if he goes back to on your agenda, the pages 114 and 115, list all of the wastewater projects, and you'd be able to see the ones that Robert's speaking of.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions, Councillor Oslech?
No, your worship.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments from other council members? Okay, seeing no more questions or comments from the public. So I'm going to turn this over to Josh. Have we had any letters or calls concerning this from the public?
Through your worship, we've not received any correspondence from the public respecting this public meeting or any of the information before us this evening.
Okay, thank you, Josh. And I'll put you on the spot again, Josh. Are there any other additional communications that you have received with respect to this notice of public meeting?
Through your worship, there are not.
Okay, thank you. Council will now consider a resolution respecting the town water and wastewater rate report from Watson and Associates. And Josh, could you please read that resolution?
That the presentation from Gary Scanlon of Watson Associates Economists regarding the water and wastewater rate study be received as information.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Chapman and Councillor Charlton. Are there any further questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. And thank you so much, Gary and Daryl, for attending this evening. Okay, we have another, well, I guess we need a resolution. So I'll ask you to read that, please, Josh, if you don't mind.
That council do now adjourn the public meeting at 7:38 p.m.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Oslech and Deputy Mayor Andrews, are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Now we'll move on to the next public meeting concerning a report CAO 4621, and that is the Community Improvement Program. And we have a resolution, please, for that.
That council do now commence a public meeting under the Planning Act at 7:39 p.m. to receive input from the public with respect to the item 5.2.1, Chief Administrative Officer Report CAO 4621, Report Community Improvement Plan Update.
Okay, thank you. Someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Ham and Councillor Chapman, are there any further questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. This public meeting is taking place pursuant to subsection 17, 17, and 28 of the Planning Act 1990 as amended. The public meeting is respecting a proposed townwide affordable housing community improvement plan. At this virtual public meeting, council will hear public representations in respect to amendments to the Town of Aylmer's Community Improvement Plan to add grant opportunities related to new affordable housing developments. The purpose of the proposed amendments to the Community Improvement Plan is to extend the ability for the Town of Aylmer to provide incentives to development or redevelopment that creates more affordable housing opportunities. Currently, incentives are only possible in the downtown CIP area. Please note that those who do not provide comment or written submission prior to the passage of a bylaw amending the Community Improvement Plan may not be afforded the right to appeal to the local planning appeals tribunal. For more information about this matter, including information about appeal rights, contact Andrew Gazelle, Chief Administrative Officer, by telephone or email. If council adopts the amendment to the CIP, it will then be sent to Elgin County for a request to match the proposed tax reductions and the province of Ontario for review and approval. The Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing is the approval authority. Council will hear comments in the following order. And so we'll start first with our CAO. So I will turn it over to you, Andy, please.
Thank you, Mayor French. So the proposed amendment to the Community Improvement Plan seeks to expand the area eligible for grants, fee waivers, and incremental tax reliefs related to affordable housing from the downtown area to all residential lands in Aylmer. The main focus of the plan is the development of affordable rental units. This is not because we don't want to encourage home ownership, but it is simply the reality that rental units are more realistic at this time and have the greatest ability to increase the local affordable housing stock. The affordability rental rates are based upon the 2018 CMHC averages for the London St. Thomas region. Priority would be given to projects that are charging a rate of no greater than 80% of these. And the town would also work with Housing and Social Services to enable any projects that are based upon 30% of income scenarios. So that's kind of the rent geared to income approach. We've confirmed with Housing and Social Services that they would support us in that. These are steps to ensure that we don't have builders creating affordable housing that is not really affordable, which happens in some communities. As applications come forward, we will have council review them and determine what level of support they are comfortable with. It is staff's intent to address these requests as they arise outside of the budget process. So in future years, this could include utilizing projected year-end surpluses for financing or accessing the Council Initiatives Reserve Fund. This approach is preferred to ensure that affordable housing support isn't addressed as an additional levy pressure simply due to the infrequency of such initiatives arising. And with that, I'll try to answer any questions that council might have.
Okay, are there any questions or comments for Andy from council members? Councillor Charlton, did you have a question or comment? Go ahead.
Yes, and so this is just dealing with lands that are not in the downtown area. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor French. So currently, the only lands that are eligible for this type of these types of incentives are in the downtown area. So the downtown area will always be covered.
Okay, and so other lands that are deemed for residential, building, they'll now qualify for some assistance. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor French. Yes, so that would be correct. If they would like to make an application, then we can present it to council with a recommendation.
And so that would be lands like the Centennial Estates or the vacant property just at the end of Clarence Street where the laundromat was and the building that burnt down. They would then qualify.
Yes, as long as they meet the criteria for the rental rates. So that's the big determining factor, is that you have to be charging a rate that is at that 20 market rate or lesser.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Chapman?
Through you, your worship. So does that mean that these affordable units could be anywhere in the town? Is that what I'm understanding?
So the only prerequisite is that you need to be correctly zoned for residential land.
So any residential land anywhere in the town can apply for this.
Through you, Mayor French, yes, any residential land could be affordable housing development, but council would consider them each individually, and there would be no commitment on council to grant any funding for any of them.
Are there further questions or comments? Councillor Ham, did you have your hand up?
No, sorry.
Okay, sorry, I thought you did. Okay, with no further questions, I'll turn it to the clerk. The public, have you heard anything from the public, Josh?
Through you, your worship, we've not received comment from any members of the public with respect to this public meeting.
And there are no members of the public here in attendance this evening, correct?
That's correct, your worship.
Okay. Thank you, Josh. I'll turn it back to the CAO. Is there anything further you'd like to share with council about this, Andy?
I think Councillor Chapman has another question, but no, I just think that in principle, the only thing further that I'd share with council is in principle, we do know that there is going to be a lot of grant funding. It's hard to ignore that this has been a big federal election issue going forward, affordable housing and the lack of housing stock in Ontario and Canada. So there will be some funding opportunities, and I think that this makes us well poised to be in a position to support somebody that wants to come in and build something that would help a lot of people in our community and in the surrounding Elgin County area as well.
Thank you, Andy. Sorry, Councillor Chapman, go ahead.
Thank you, your worship. So is it normal for a municipality to deem all residential lands in this manner? Is that a normal practice?
Through you, Mayor French, yes, generally, if you're looking at affordable housing, it would be something that you would put across. You might not go and deem existing neighborhoods as being it, but any new developable lands you would want to identify as being part of the affordable housing, just to allow those opportunities. Because what can happen is you can have somebody who wants to build a subdivision and they're thinking about putting townhouses or something of that nature there, and this could lead to them considering some kind of multi-unit duplex or something of that nature. So it's always important from a planning perspective to have a mix of uses with any development. So this is what that would encourage.
Go ahead, Councillor Chapman.
So am I understanding correctly that if there's an already developed area, if a land came available within that developed area, would still apply, or we might just stick a unit in the middle of a developed area? I'm trying to get my head around the whole concept, so.
So if you had certainly if you had something that was a vacant building or something that is fallen into disrepair in a residential neighborhood and somebody wanted to go in and renovate it and turn it into affordable housing stock, then we would. We don't expect to see a lot of these in neighborhoods simply because the detached home or townhouses are usually unaffordable for affordable, like the market's priced them out of the affordable housing. So we expect it to be more of apartment buildings, multi-unit type things. And they would have to go in areas that are zoned appropriately for that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Barber?
Thank you, Worship. Just to follow up with Andy's last comments, these would normally be in higher density residential areas, not in single family or low density development, strictly because based on cost.
Okay, did you want to, do you have any comments, Andy, about what Councillor Barber just said, or?
Oh, no, oh, sorry, he's correct. I was nodding my head.
I think you had something further to add. Sorry about that, Andy. Are there any other questions or comments about this report? Councillor Ham, go ahead.
Thank you, through your worship, to Andy. With the grants that you were mentioning, do we know what they look like and how far reaching they are, and maybe a little more details at this point?
Through you, Mayor French. So there is an existing grant opportunity right now. I believe it's called SSF Fund, but that one has a very short time frame. Our expectation is that there will be significant new grant programs announced following the federal election. Both major parties, the Conservatives and the Liberals, have announced an addition of housing. The Conservatives' plan is a bit further off in the future. So their project has a bit more of a longer timeline, but the Liberals want to start adding 70 to 80,000 houses built a year in Canada. And a lot of those are directly targeted for affordable housing. There will be certainly a mix of how we get there. Some of it could be promoting more secondary units, which is kind of something that we're going to look at next. But a lot of it will try to be to just create new units like apartments and things like that. So we do anticipate that there will be a lot of funding announced and a lot of funding criteria. And we just hope there's enough builders around to do all the work that everybody wants to get accomplished next year.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Any further questions or comments? Okay, seeing none. Council will now consider a resolution respecting the proposed amendment to the Community Improvement Plan. And Josh, could you read that resolution, please?
That report CAO 4621 respecting Community Improvement Plan update be received as information, and that Council directs staff to present the Community Improvement Plan update amendment to bylaws 3412 and 3512 to adopt the changes proposed by staff. And further, that any comments received as a part of the statutory public meeting be considered in a future recommendation staff report.
Okay, thank you. Someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Charlton and Deputy Mayor Andrews, are there any further questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. And now the resolution for adjournment, please, Josh.
That Council do now adjourn the public meeting at 7:54 p.m.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Oslach and Councillor Charlton. Questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Okay, the next item up is minutes to approve.
That Council approves the following minutes. Regular virtual meeting of Council held on September 13th, 2021.
Someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Chapman and Councillor Charlton. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. The next item up is minutes to receive.
That council receives the following minutes. Meeting of the East Elgin Community Complex Board of Management held on September 8th, 2021.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Deputy Mayor Andrews and Councillor Ham. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Now we'll move on to the consent agenda.
That items 7.1 to 7.5 of the September 20th, 2021 consent agenda be adopted as presented with actions to be taken as noted.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Deputy Mayor Andrews and Councillor Ham. Are there any questions or comments? No items to be pulled or any conversation? Okay, with no further questions or comments, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. We'll move into the action items. The first item up is report CAO 5221.
That report CAO 5221 respecting the 2022 budget engagement be received as information.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Chapman and Councillor Charlton. And I'll turn this over to you, Andy, please.
Thank you, Mayor French. I will try to keep this presentation brief. However, it's addressing a lot of important information, so I want to make sure I don't glaze over anything. To begin with, I want to thank the community for participating in the survey. We got 212 responses. Just to give you an idea of how impressive that is, the Elgin County's 2021 budget received 231 responses. So we've got under a fifth of the people to survey, and we got almost as well as they did last year. If we go down to the next slide, you can see that the town is taking a bit more of an aggressive schedule with our budget this year. Ideally, at some point, we would like to finalize our budgets in December or November. So we know what we're already spending before we start our year. The timelines really assist, particularly with capital projects. You can imagine the competition for capital works coming out of the pandemic. So I think a lot of municipalities that wait till March or April to tender their projects will get worse pricing. So my hope is that Elmer can get our capital done separately in November and start sending those contracts and tenders out really early before anybody else this year. As you can go on to the next page. Yeah, as you can see, obviously, this is just the first step of the conversation with the community. We want to keep the conversation going throughout the whole budget process, and we want to build on this so that next year we'll try to have a proactive kind of budget dialogue with the community on a project that they select and want to move forward in 2023. So that's been done in a lot of other communities to improve engagement, and it's often a recreation or parks themed project that gets picked, but it can be really engaging to the community. The one example I saw that London did was a little girl wanted a swing set in a park, so she drew a little picture of a swing set and put it in the box, and then residents voted for it, and that's eventually what got built. So it can be a real interesting way to connect with people of all ages within the community. So I'm hoping we could budget that and do that next year. As you can see on the next page, our budget drivers are going to be high capital cost in 2022. The Elk Street reconstruction alone will be over $3 million. So to place this in the context, our auditor has historically described 1.5 million as our average capital outlay. So we're going to do well over 2 years capital work in 1 year in 2022. This places council at a starting point where they're going to have to make some tough decisions on project deferrals, running down reserves, or increasing levies. So that's a really tough situation for council to be in, but we're going to have that discussion in detail in November, and I'm just highlighting it now to make sure that nobody's surprised that it is going to be kind of a longer drawn out meeting when we have that discussion. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, though. We've restructured to better support development, and our expectation is that we're going to start seeing substantial growth in assessments starting in 2023 and into 2024. So the long-term vision of the community is very bright. We just have another tight year or two before us where we really need to focus upon growth as a means to support the local tax base. So before I go on, I know for the members of the public watching, I should talk a little bit about mill rates and current value assessment. So I'll just provide a brief explainer. Current value assessment is not the market value of your home. However, sale prices of homes in your neighborhood are a factor in the calculation when the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation undertakes a new assessment. Due to the COVID-19, the province has halted their agency, MPAC, from updating assessments from the 2016 values. We're awaiting news from the government upon when the reassessment will occur, but we're anticipating that it'll be in 2023. This is an important thing to understand because with property assessments, it doesn't change how much money we need as a town for our operations. So the levy will still be around $6 million annually. However, the portion your home may pay would change due to a reassessment. As the average home price in Aylmer is in the low 200,000s, we anticipate that residential homes could see a substantial change in their assessments when MPAC undertakes their next review. So I think that's something that I really want members of the public to be aware of, is that there is something on the horizon that could really impact them next year that has nothing to do with the municipality. The way your taxes are determined is the current value assessment is multiplied by the mill rate and then multiplied by 100. In order to avoid that last step, a lot of people represent the mill rate without the 2 zeros before, and that's my preferred approach. So I kind of already do that multiplication by 100. There are 3 different mill rates: the towns, the counties, and the education. And when these are added together and multiplied by your CVA, that's how you get your end tax bill. This may seem like insider baseball, but it's important for the public to understand because sometimes municipalities just focus upon the levy rate to essentially dumb things down. This is fine, but if you look at 2000 for Aylmer, for instance, we saw an estimated 5.9% increase in assessment. And so although we delivered a 0% budget in 2020, what we actually did was increase our cost by 4.5%. So as residents watch over the next few years and assessment changes and CVAs alter, they should keep an eye on what the bottom line of municipalities are as well, just so they're aware of whether or not people are increasing their expenses substantially over this period. When you look at our budget increases, we've increased by 17% since 2016. However, the actual impact on ratepayers over this period was more like 1% per annum, and that's just because of the assessment growth. So if we go on to the next slide there. I think it's, am I lagging?
Hi, Andy. It's Owen. We've actually lost Josh. He's going to jump back in the meeting, but the slides will not advance at the moment.
Oh, that's okay. Oh, he's right back. The next one is just a slide that shows our kind of year-over-year increases. So it's just a chart. What happened, just to paraphrase it, was in 2016 and 2017, the council had a lot of 2 zeros kind of, and then we saw an increase for an increase in a need for an increase in revenue. So we went up to 4.5 for a couple years, and then last year we went down to the 2.46 amount. Josh, are you able to advance it now? Hop back on.
Yeah, apologies. Andy, I'm just having some technical difficulties. My computer crashed and I'm not able to change the screen, but we are working on it.
Okay, yeah, so it's full moon stuff. It's always my excuse. If councilors have it in their agenda, I can kind of go over it. What you see when you look at the town of Elmer's mill rates is they were really high in 2010, and then they went down to a low point in 2016. And then since then, 2016 and 2017 were our lowest at about 0.81. And then we've gone back up a couple points. So now we're at 0.84. So overall, our mill rates are somewhat high. I would say that our sweet spot for the town of Elmer is between 0.81 and 0.85. And I do think that we will get there as a town. It just won't be in this year. So we're likely to get to the area where we need to be in 2023 and 2024. But we are very close to where we should be for taxation. And one of the reasons for that is simply the need in the operations that we run and the costs associated with it, and the limited population that we have in Elmer. So there's only certain ways to address that, and one of them is population growth and assessment growth, which we're kind of working towards, and that will certainly help overall. Now, oh, I think we're out there. So yeah, if you go down past that one. Yeah, so I kind of just on this one, we went up 17%. So you can see that's almost $900,000 that we've gone up since 2016. Our mill rate from 2016's low hasn't come up that much. It's still pretty low. It's only 0.025% higher. So it doesn't have a drastic impact, but it still is high. And you can see we had multiple years where we had actual reductions in our mill rates. If you go on to the next slide. Yeah, and here you can see where we were high in 2010. We hit that low plateau in 2016, 2017, and then we kind of come up and again are in that kind of range where it looks like we're really getting close to where we need to be. And go on to the next slide. So I'm going to pick on Elgin County for a little bit, but before I do that, I need to preface it that I'm just highlighting that what the numbers show us. I'm not providing a narrative that says the county is not providing the most competitive rates they can. This first chart shows us the county's residential mill rates and how they increase over time. We can see that the county's levy needs have increased 22% since 2016. It's important to note that this is a percentage that's of a larger number, so it represents a bigger increase than what Elmer saw. We saw 16%, they saw 22%, but it's a portion of a bigger number. So their levy needs increased just over $8 million over that time. And if we go on to the next slide. So we can see that over in 4 years since 2016, the county has constituted the majority of the increases on residential tax bills in Elmer. So this isn't to indicate that they're taking a larger portions of the taxes. It just highlights that in those years, they represented the largest year-over-year change. So 4 years since 2016, they were the larger amount of change on the residential bill. If we go on to the next page. As you can see, the county occupies 38% of the local levy. This is 2021 numbers. This is a significantly higher proportion than we see in other county systems. Without doing a full analysis of all county government, we can't place an exact number upon the difference, but we're likely looking at the county, lower tiers supporting the county by 10 to 15% more than what is commonly seen in Ontario. Again, you can see in the next slide that in 2021, the county represented 61% of the year-over-year increase. And to place that in context, that is the difference between them passing a 2.9% levy increase and the town of Elmer passing a 2.46% increase. So it is even a small, close budget there. They are very close to taking a big portion of the pie. Now, if we go on to the next slide. This next slide shows overall tax competitiveness. Elmer is a little off where we need to be. To compare us to St. Thomas is currently ranked the 3rd highest city in Ontario in terms of property taxation. So we're out ahead of St. Thomas, so we are high. But it's not a problem for just us. You can kind of see that Central Elgin, Dutton, Dunwich, and potentially Bayham all have potential issues with tax affordability and competitiveness. So the issue of taxation is not really a Elmer specific one. Our local rate is a bit higher, and that's the reason why we're out front. But if we did get that 8.4 rate that we have now to 8.3 or 8.2, we'd be the same as the other municipalities. If we go to the next slide, you can see how Elgin County's mill rates are higher. They're 6.24, where the majority of other upper tier municipalities are at 0.39 or between that and 0.44. So we're talking that they're a 0.2 higher than other municipalities in terms of residential ones. All other, they're the highest. And that's a substantial amount when we're talking about mill rates. So they are high, and it is a reality that we have to face. If we go on to the next slide. Here we're looking at the farm, industrial, and commercial. And you can see that they're high on all of them for a county. And this isn't cherry picking comparable counties. I think if you did look at the counties, you'd probably find that Elgin County is amongst the highest in Ontario. As a result, even if the town does our best to get our rates down to 0.8 or even a 0.79, which would be great considering the level of services and that we provide about 75% of the services to the residents. We still will always be 0.2 higher in our mill rates than other jurisdictions simply because of the county pressure. And that's something we share with all surrounding municipalities. So the county is really going to continue to influence affordability in Elgin County, regardless of what the town of Elmer does. And that's something that I want the public to really understand, is that the town of Elmer is a portion of this, but even at our best, there's still going to be not great taxes in Elmer. We can make it better, but we can't close that gap. When you look at the chart, as I mentioned, it would be in the report, it would be ideal to see the farm mills increase by Elgin County, but that's a very unlikely outcome. They are high in the farm rates, but they aren't the highest like they are for other categories. One thing I think we can see from the survey is that access to county services was ranked much lower than Elmer's services. Despite this, residents didn't seem to have a really unified opinion upon county services. So it's important for staff to highlight that residents are paying a significant portion of taxes to the county. And in some municipalities like Oxford, the upper tier does additional things like garbage pickup. This is not to suggest that the county is not providing full value to the town of Elmer. It is just to highlight that the numbers play a unique scenario, and that it is a pressure upon us and upon our ratepayers. If we could move on. In terms of the survey, it's nice to see that the majority of people do not want us to take an axe to services. Despite this, we're still looking at areas where we can find efficiencies. Really, our focus right now is upon accomplishing more work with the current complement and aligning business processes to make that possible. There are some areas that people always rank lower, like trails, parks, and bylaw. So it's usually easy to make a case for something like fire. Everybody sees that that's going to provide a needed service to the community. So fire usually doesn't have to fight and argue for their worth. The one thing I would note is how successful our new communications plan is. So we would never have had the response to this survey that we achieved without a really great communications approach. So the fact that Josh and Owen are able to develop this plan and implement it on a continual basis, utilizing what is essentially a quarter or a fifth of the deputy clerk's role, is really an amazing return on a minimal investment. If we could go on. Next slide. Yeah, so a lot of the comments were about the police services. Certainly, it does involve, need some separate consideration. We can see that people are concerned about cost. I do think it's a good idea to review after the OPP sets agreements with other area municipalities in 2022. I do think the Elmer Police Service will look quite favorable to the OPP when new costings come out. And we do have a much greater ability to contain costs locally and maintain a higher level of service. In terms of the OPP, I do think that they will be applying a lot of additional costs in the future to make up for government cutbacks. So we just came out of a year where we were requiring additional police responses on most Sundays and will be under budget on salaries. So I do think if we were with the OPP, we would have an unfavorable budget variance this year. And so I do think there is some obvious benefit to really thoroughly examining this, but not losing sight of what we already have in place, which is really a great service for a good price. And if we go on to the next one, next slide. I'll address the library in the next report, but I did want to graphically illustrate just so everybody can kind of see the level of opposition and support for a library expansion or redevelopment. The pie chart is surprising to me. And we move on to the next slide. So this slide just really rehashes the budget pressures that we see for 2022. Certainly, the pressure of the county is one that's out of our control. The need to continue to support, to develop, to avoid lost opportunity costs. That's a big thing for us now, because if we can add assessment, then we'll be able to reduce people's property taxes. But that comes at a trade-off. To add assessment, you need to build new roads, or you need to invest in new services. So it's a delicate balance. And if we could go on to the next slide. One thing I want to highlight is that Elmer has very few staff compared to the amount of services we provide. I'd recommend that the public take a look at this org chart so that they can see that we're not some large faceless organization. We're a small team of dedicated staff, and I tip my hat to each and every employee for their efforts over the last year and a half, as it's really been a stressful and challenging time for a lot of them. And with that, I'll perhaps wrap up and let council ask any questions they might have about the process.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Are there any questions or comments for Andy? Okay, I do want to make mention that I do appreciate Owen's work with our social media, and he had a great report, and I'm sorry I missed that, and I just want to tell him that I think he did an awesome job with that report, and he's doing an awesome job with our social media. And you're absolutely right, Andy, with what he's been doing, that's made this possible so that we can get these questions answered by the public. So this is amazing, and it's great, and I'm really pleased to see that. Okay, so if there aren't any questions or comments on this report, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. The next report is CAO 5521.
That report, CAO 5521, respecting library update, be received as information, and that staff be directed to contact the county to renegotiate the lease for the library that is set to expire on September 24th, 2022, and further that staff be directed to bring back a further report to council if the fundraising towards the project and the minimum amount of $500,000 is achieved.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Someone to move and someone to second. Deputy Mayor Andrews and Councillor Barber. And I'll turn this back over to you, Andy, so you can elaborate on this report, please.
Thank you, Mayor French. I've seen a lot of new CAOs step knee deep in it when they've waded into historical issues. So I hope if I go too astray, council will rescue me. At a high level, the town does not provide library services. We lease a building to the county to do so. During the budget survey, we reviewed we canvassed for support for the project, and frankly, I was surprised by the level of opposition to this project. That isn't to say that a library expansion or redevelopment won't go forward. It's just that we really need to focus upon getting our new industrial park developed and all the other capital works planned for 2022 and 2023. So staff is presenting this report to essentially confirm that this won't be a priority for this term of council. Really, as there's only 13 months left in the term, we would never suggest starting such a potentially contentious issue at this stage of a term of council, because the next term could just take office in November and reverse all of the decisions done to date. So we'd like to save the community from some further drama on this and kind of clearly say that it will be the next term of council to decide this matter. I think what will change the opposition that we saw in that survey to this file and eventually really get this project underway is a group having a substantial amount of fundraising done when a grant opportunity comes up. Whether this amount is $500,000 or $100,000, I think is somewhat inconsequential. I certainly have seen community, Delhi recently raised $200,000 and was able to get a library expansion and a grant for another $100,000 because of that work. So it does kind of fit the form that I think a lot of areas are looking for and a lot of grant opportunities are looking for, is to have that local fundraising. I also would like to highlight that while everybody has opinion that we'll certainly listen to, if you're asking the municipality to spend $2 to $3 million on a project like this, you really need to bring funds to be a partner and to critique the final plan. Having skin in the game is really important for any group that we're going to really work and go to the finish line with this project. And having some skin in the game really means that they're going to be committed, and we're not going to invest a lot of time just to have them say at the 11th hour, we don't want to be part of this project, or you're building it in the wrong location, or the design's wrong, or all these other issues that will come up in a very complicated capital project like this. I do know the local library supporters are able to take the work of fundraising up, and certainly would encourage them to do so and reach out to the county to see if they could work in concert with library staff to really optimize that. But the town would also be willing to completely support them in their efforts, and certainly would like to see the dialogue on this project continue.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Are there any questions or comments concerning this report? Councillor Charlton?
So it's not up to this current council to make a decision. We're almost in a lame duck situation, I guess. And so if something doesn't happen in the first 2.5 years of the next council, it will be put on the shelf again. Is that kind of the timeline that we're looking at? And then it could even be pushed off another 4 years beyond that.
Through you, Mayor French, I think there's a couple of issues at play with the project. From a town's perspective, we're going into significant investment in infrastructure, core infrastructure needs that we really need to take care of, and the development of our business park. So it's hard to prioritize a project like this while we're doing that, but the results of those investments will be that we should increase assessment, and we should have hopefully more money to do it. But my sense is that the opposition to the project has been that this would be borne by the taxpayers. So, and that the cost would be borne even if it's issued through debt. So what we need to do is improve that outlook. And if we can improve that outlook where it's grant funding or fundraising or assessment growth means that we can do it with a lesser levy impact, then the project stands a better chance of success. But, you know, I'd rather, you've almost got to plan when you've got this much opposition, you've got to plan an approach that we aren't going to waste a lot of time and resources and then have people say, we didn't want that library expansion. It has to be additional funding to what the town puts up.
Go ahead, Councillor Charlton.
Yeah, through your worship, I don't know if you pulled the $500,000 out of your hat or whatever, but I didn't think that was all that much. That's only 100 people at 5,000 apiece, and I kind of don't think that would be that hard to come across. Anyway, that's just my take on it. Thank you. Good report.
Are there any further questions or comments concerning this report? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. The next report is CAO 5621.
That report, CAO 5621, respecting COVID-19 update, EECC policy, be received as information.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Oslach and Deputy Mayor Andrews. It's a pretty self-explanatory report, but Andy, did you have anything further to add?
Thank you, my friend. No, I just wanted to add that this was the minimal provincial standards that we're enforcing. So, and also ask people to try to keep this land as neutral ground. I think our kids really need this outlet, and there's tons of places to protest, let's not make it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. The next item up is Report Finance 0521.
That report, Finance 0521, entitled Corporate Credit Card Limit Increase, be received for information. And that council consider giving 3 readings to a bylaw authorizing the mayor and clerk to execute an agreement to increase the corporate credit card limit for the town of Aylmer with the Bank of Montreal from $20,000 to $50,000.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Someone to move and someone to second. Deputy Mayor Andrews and Councillor Charlton. And I'll turn this over to you, Heather, if you want to just give us a little bit more information, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. To you and members of council, basically, I think it was in 2020, they had approved 4 credit cards be issued to directors of the corporation. With me coming on board, I've realized that maybe we should be issuing a couple more because we are still having substantial expenses come through employees such as the HR manager and manager of operations. Usually the manager of operations is using his own credit card during a time of emergency situation. So to avoid that and avoid that pressure, by increasing the credit card limit and issuing a card to the HR manager and manager of operations and deputy chief of police, we won't have to have our employees posting expenses on their personal credit cards. If anybody has any questions, I can expand.
Thank you, Heather. Are there any questions for Heather? Seeing none. Thank you, Heather. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. The next item up is Director of Corporate and Legislative Services, and it's an East Elgin Community Complex follow-up. And I'll turn that over to Josh to read the resolution first, please.
That the Council of the Town of Aylmer support the submission of the EECC Parking Lot Rehabilitation Project to the Ontario Trillium Fund Community Building Capital Stream Opportunity, and further that a letter of support be forwarded to the EECC administrator for inclusion in the Ontario Trillium Fund Community Building Capital Stream submission.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Barber and Councillor Ham. And I'll turn it back over to you, Josh, if you want to elaborate at all on this particular report.
Certainly, through your worship and two members of council, members will recall at the last East Elgin Community Complex board meeting that notice of a grant opportunity was brought forward, which implicated the ECC for the refurbishment of the parking lot. Several years back, the town had received a quote on that. It's been budgeted for, but at this time, now that there is a grant opportunity available, the board has expressed interest in applying for that grant. Being that the ECC is jointly owned and operated by the town of Elmer and the township of Malahide, the board directed previously that it requests support from both member councils to support this grant application. So before council this evening, we've got a draft letter, and we're recommending that the town endorse it to be sent on to the EECC board administrator, which happens to be the town CAO.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Are there any questions or concerns about this? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Is there any new business or matters of urgency? Okay, seeing none. Third and final reading.
That council gives third reading and final approval to bylaw 4921, being a bylaw to amend the bylaw 0718 as amended, referred to as the procedural bylaw, and bylaw 5221, being a bylaw to appoint a deputy division registrar and deputy issuer of marriage licenses for the town.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Chapman and Councillor Charlton. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. The next item up is to suspend procedural policies.
That council suspends the procedural policies to proceed with three readings of bylaw 5321, being a bylaw to adopt a policy for the approval of municipal grants and donations.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Deputy Mayor Andrews and Councillor Chapman, are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. And we'll move now to the three readings.
That council approves and gives three readings to bylaw 5321, being a bylaw to adopt a policy for the approval of municipal grants and donations.
Okay, someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Ham and Councillor Charlton, are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Are there any inquiries by members? Okay, seeing none. Are there statements and committee reports to present? Seeing none this evening. There is no report of the mayor. I don't believe there's any notice of motion. So the next item up is the meeting closed to the public. And could we have the resolution, please, Josh?
That council moves into a meeting closed to the public at 8:32 p.m. to discuss the following matters. Chief Administrative Officer report CAO 5721, respecting an update on 105 White Street pursuant to section 239 2C of the Municipal Act as amended, as the subject matter pertains to a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality.
Thank you, Josh. Someone to move and someone to second. Councillor Chapman and Councillor Ham, are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor?